Hey, and welcome as we kick off season 2 of the Leading Adam podcast. Whether you've been listening to us for a while or whether this is your first time, thank you so much for joining us. This season, we promise even more guests and engaging conversations around leading and the human experience. Today, Adam and I are joined by Dr. Kevin Wachtel, Executive Director of Partnerships for Indiana Wesleyan University, and we talk all things strategic and how that impacts an organizational culture. Thanks for listening and stay with us.
The Leading Adam podcast is hosted by me, Adam Binkerd. I've spent the last 10 years researching how a healthy human experience is the key to innovation in student retention and education, and now I'm taking to the mic to share what I've learned. Hear how I've defied the odds and transformed from a landscaper to a national expert in student success in less than 10 years. Not an educator? That's okay. Stay tuned for entertaining stories and practical takeaways about leading self, leading leaders, and leading culture. The Leading Adam podcast is co-hosted by Erika Crabtree, produced by Chris Spangle, and sponsored by 240 Solutions. Connect with us at 240solutions.com, and I hope you'll stay tuned because together we can change the world.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. Welcome to season 2.
Season 2?
Yeah,
I'm so excited.
I am too, and I've been watching back on some of season 1 and enjoying that. I think my favorite by far is when we have guests.
Oh,
and
totally.
That's been good. I noticed something though. So when we had, I think it's episode 14, we had Laura Cope on.
Oh,
and it was just me and her because you couldn't be here for that recording.
I'm so excited for that one.
So I got the power seat. In the episode. What I noticed is you're typically in that seat. When I sit in the power seat, you can barely see the seat. When you sit in it,
it is quite a snuggly little small chair.
It looks bigger when you sit in it, is what I'm saying. I watched. I thought that was pretty.
So
comical.
you couch, chair. Do you have a favorite?
I like
you could switch it up.
like the high arms of the chair.
Yeah.
So I'd
that is
probably
nice.
pick chair, but I'm good over here.
Good either way.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You ready for season 2?
I am totally ready.
Good.
Yep.
Good.
And we've got a guest here today with us.
We do. So for those listening, every episode in season 2, we're aiming to have a guest because we recognize after kind of watching back and hearing your feedback that guests are where it's at. It opens the dialogue. And our conversation's much more rich and fluid, and so we're aiming for that. We'll see if we can pull it off.
And we don't get tired of our own voices.
It's
nice to have a.
You don't get tired of hearing me talk. I hear you. But yeah, we're excited about that. But that's a little bit of pressure. That's 16 guests, and it's hard to coordinate schedules. So we're
have
aiming
several
for it.
Already lined up.
We do, and boy, we have got
Stoked.
a good lineup too. I'm really excited. And I think my commitment, Erika, this season is to be more bold. And when I watch back season 1, I realize I am not saying what I actually think sometimes.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And I think I'm pandering a little bit to, not wanting to be controversial or whatever.
Right.
But the reality is I'm very passionate about this, and I think there is a right and wrong to leading. And sometimes I think we need to call it what it is.
Yeah.
And I think there's things that we do organizationally that don't make sense for the human experience. And I think we're going to confront one of those. And or some of those, not one of those. But as an example, we're going to get into talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion this season. And we're going to hit it right in the mouth because it's one of those things that in a healthy human experience, you have to question. Does that need to exist the way that it exists in its current context? Right. So stuff like that just is a little bit of a teaser, but I'm coming with it this season. No more holding back for me.
Man.
If we get canceled, whatever.
I'm ready.
So anyway, what are you looking forward to for season 2?
Yeah, I think just the variety of guests and the diversity of people that we'll have on and exploring different topics, different perspectives. Everyone brings a different, unique background.
Right.
So yeah, I'm really, really excited to approach, a human experience in different ways that shows up in the variety of organizations and how that plays out with different leaders. So
yeah, because right now we've got a small business, to universities, to consulting businesses. We've got a pretty good lineup of guests.
Yeah.
Coming with quite a bit of experience, and most of it relative directly to education. So,
That'll be a good
but
one.
we're opening season 2 with a guest.
With a guest.
And I'm excited
Yeah.
about this guest. So our guest for season 2 is not only a friend of mine, but a mentor to me in my career, and we'll talk about how. I have mad respect for this gentleman. And so with us is Dr. Kevin Wachtel.
Finally.
Finally. Kevin, we will refer to him as Kevin, is joining us, and we're going to get into Kevin's experience and what that looks like, how he's developed his leadership approach and what that looks like. But welcome, Kevin Wachtel.
Thank you. And what a way to kick off your diversity season with an old white guy.
Nailed it, right?
Nailed it.
I told
Right
you,
there.
we're going to hit it right in the mouth.
gonna cover it all.
We're coming for it. We're starting with a middle-aged white guy and an old white guy.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought you were going to call me middle-aged and I was going to get real excited. So.
No, sir. No,
Sorry.
sir. We're not that close in age, but it's good to have you on to talk through
Yeah, I
this.
appreciate the invitation. You and I have always loved sharing.
Always.
And it's like a class reunion here with Erika. So it's be fun.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, old times,
Old
right?
times. Yeah.
Well, I think we'll get into some questions, but I mean, let's start. You work at Indiana Wesleyan University,
Correct.
and you want to talk about that role also. But you formerly, one of the things I love and how much your experience was a mentorship to me was the context in which you came to education or came from, and being a senior VP at a multi-billion-dollar company. Bringing that perspective into education was so contrary to what we had experienced in any other executive leadership at the university. And so I want you to talk a little bit about that as well as we go through this. But so you've got that background, but tell us, Indiana Wesleyan University, what are you doing? What is your role, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so I've been at the university for about 5 years now. I was originally hired to be Chief Strategy Officer for the online portion of the university, National and Global, which was a newly created job, which now no longer exists. So I can claim to be the best Chief Strategy Officer in the history of Indiana Wesleyan University.
Why not?
Why not? And so I did that for several years, had a lot of experience with you and your team, with student engagement and retention, but managed a portfolio of between 5 and 6 action initiative plans using a model from Patterson, which was not a model that I was familiar with, but most of my career I had strategic planning and strategy execution experience. So it was a great pivot. It was also interesting because the vast majority of my career I was a supervisor, manager, leader. And so one of the things that enticed me about this role was that it was standalone. It didn't have any direct reports. So I felt like it was a really different dynamic that I would have to have informal leadership
Right.
to get things done, because I literally did nothing. All I did was, and the way I described it to my family was, I come to work like a 5-year-old every day. And I just go, why? You experienced that.
I did. I was just sitting here thinking, so your strategy was to take a position here and have to use influential leadership.
Exactly.
And your first approach was to just upset people by asking continually why.
Right. And you find out where people come from. You find out how invested people are in a plan when you ask weird questions, challenging questions, and then hear what they have to say. Because really my initial approach was, I need to know where we stand with this. I need to know how invested the organization is in delivering it.
Yeah.
Because if I'm coming into a brand new job with really no authority to do anything except write and document, and find out that none of the organization believes in the plan, then I'm pretty much hosed.
Yeah.
And so the process of meeting with each of the owners of the AIPs really give me clarity on intentionality.
Yep.
So many places I've worked, the strategic plan was write it, put it in a binder,
Sure.
and then in the bookcase.
Yeah.
And then when somebody asks, the annual reviews are coming out, we better do an update on the plan, then everybody pulls out the binder and does it.
Right.
Now, I had a fairly relentless weekly process, and so nobody had time to put the book away because we were talking about it all the time.
Yeah. And important to note, too, AIP, you said that fluidly, Action Initiative Plan, which was the acronym.
Right.
And that was something that we were actively working through on a regular basis.
Right.
So, sorry to cut you off.
And those were the objectives, if you will. Every good strategic plan has a hierarchy.
Right.
I have a paradigm of hierarchy that I used in organizations in which I worked. Patterson is a different hierarchy, but essentially it's go from the big broad to the small actionable detail.
Right.
Right.
Right. So, I don't know where you want to go, but that's the stuff, like, just to qualify, when I talk about, from my view, mentorship, and I would say to the audience, if you're a leader and you don't have a mentor, something's probably missing in your world. I have multiple mentors for different reasons, and this is one that when I say you are a mentor to me, you really help me resolve the challenge of a good plan versus good execution.
Right.
And more importantly, the knowing of that execution. Like, how do we know we're making progress? And we'll get to that.
And I think I used better phraseology with you than I used with others, which was, so what? They'd read their objective out and I'd say, so what?
Right. Yeah. It was very direct.
And those AAPs, if I recall correctly, were relatively shorter in term. You think about strategic plans and the ones that end up on the shelf. Do you see more frequently, those tend to be longer reaching plans or longer term plans versus the approach that you took?
Yeah,
with those.
That was the interesting thing about Patterson is Patterson really focused on execution. And if you create too long of a time frame, people lose interest and you don't see and recognize and celebrate wins. So if the plan is 5 years, and that's the vernacular that I mostly worked in, was a 5-year plan or a 3-year plan, which goes from the broad down to the specific. So you still have that element of things that I need to get done this month or next month, and what results do you get to the organization? This plan was really built in 12 to 18 month chunks, bites. And so we were also constantly adding to, checking off and adding to. The one challenge that I faced, and I think the AIP leaders faced, was that you constantly have to go back and recycle to what you said you did, and then are you still achieving what you expected?
Right.
Now, one of the things I learned in my doctoral studies is the hybrid change management plan and the idea of benefits realization. And this is one of the things in Adam's plan and student success that we learn, is that you can achieve success in an area, and based on how you did that and what you measured, you can use that in 8 other places. I called it turbocharging, where you could learn something and then apply the learning in other places, maybe not in the same area even, with the metrics, and say, okay, I've now taken this one success and I've made 6 successes out of it.
Yeah. And what I like about that approach as well is that it accounts for learning and growth.
Exactly.
And you can celebrate those wins because you're checking things off, which is important, I think, to keep a team motivated. And, as you're working through the plan where you feel like you've had some wins and can continue to iterate and make improvements.
Exactly.
Things change all the time.
And then as you're looking at that, then you find other avenues like, okay, this is addressed, but it's like, I call it strategic whack-a-mole. You fix something over here, something else pops up.
Yeah.
You go address that and then figure out why systematically did that become an issue when it was not an issue before. But, as you improve performance, the areas that are not improving or not covering what they need to be delivering, then become very, very clear.
Right.
And we did a lot of the Pareto analysis. The initial work that we did with Adam's team focused on what is the top reason that people leave their degree program.
Right.
There's a list of 12, but there's one that was 40% of the reason. Now let's dive
Right.
into that and understand it.
Right.
And then when we start to understand it, then let's make the changes that address the reasons that students are leading.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, when we're looking at organizational leadership and the execution of strategy, is the lowest hanging fruit gets the attention. A lot of ways, in the sense of, oh, that's the problem, and we deceive ourselves into thinking that if we solve that problem, we're good.
Yeah.
But what you do is you begin to optimize the lowest hanging fruit, and all of a sudden the stuff that you thought was good doesn't look so optimized.
Right.
And you start going through that, and we did that on a regular basis. And I know that part of what our success was, in the sense, like you talked about whack-a-mole. So I want to go back to that, because part of the success we had is we found a way, a method, if you will, to mitigate whack-a-mole as much as possible. When Sarah Spengler was on, she talked about design thinking and using that approach in what we were doing. And that was a big part of mitigating whack-a-mole. You're not going to stop it completely, but you certainly can mitigate the whack-a-mole approach by inviting more perspectives into the conversation. And that's what we did, and we used design thinking to do
And
it.
as you gain more expertise in a particular area, problems and successes, it becomes more quickly apparent what the next thing is going to be before it actually blows up.
Right. Yeah, that is true. That is true. The indicators, because you're looking at measurements, you're starting to observe differently. You do start to observe early indications that we're going to have to make some adjustments, probably at this point, for this thing. So,
Yeah, and I'm curious. You mentioned, it sounds like you've worked with a variety of different departments and people across the organization, and you didn't have a team of direct reports, so you had to use your influence as a leader, working through those different departments and people. So, yeah, how would you describe your approach to leadership? And I'm curious, like, what challenges you ran. I'm sure that was challenging at times to, be able to work with all those different teams and running into maybe individuals who weren't quite so on board with this strategy.
Right. So I kind of describe my leadership approach as sort of a stew, because I've taken bits and pieces from processes and experiences and mentors and examples and sort of cobble it together, because I think one of the worst things that I could do as a leader is to try to use techniques and approaches that don't fit my persona.
agreed.
Right.
I am a lighthearted person. I like to enjoy life. I like to have jokes. And in fact, in one of my performance appraisals, I was criticized for enjoying things too much and not being serious enough.
Oh, God
Oh,
forbid.
goodness.
And so it's great to understand that. So in coming into the organization, I had multiple strikes against me. One is I was from business.
Right.
And education's not a business. I get that. So my terminology was different. My language was different. I joked with the chancellor at the time. After my first meeting with the leadership team, he coached me all the way back to the building about words that I needed to help define and be careful about using. And so I laughed. I said I had more coaching in the first one day of my job with him than I did probably in the previous 20
Was one
years.
of those words ROI? Were they confused when you said ROI?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I just can't help it.
That was
ROI
one
is
of
a foreign concept.
I'm sure there was a list that the leadership team wrote that was stuff that Kevin says that I don't understand or is foreign. So that was one strike. And I was also encouraged because I was told previously that there hadn't been or wasn't a strong enough relationship between the academic side of the university and the operations side of the university, and not having any stake in the game, because I was neither. I was neither operations nor was I academic, is just set out to create partnerships and
Right.
just bring truth, bring transparency, listen, adapt, and use the feedback that I got. So one of the things I did is I set special times to review the overall strategic plan and the engagement of specific academic units. I would go to the School of Nursing and I'd do a couple hours with the dean. The School of Health Sciences, I would go to the dean. I had to encourage and create rapport where they believed that I was representing and listening on elements that needed to be added to the plan to make things work better, to create efficiency, to create enrollment, to create satisfaction, retention, all the ROI.
Yeah.
All those things.
Easy. Careful
all
with
those
those words.
Yeah, all those things that had to be done. And it took a while, but it was such a great team. And because I really didn't have a horse in the game, you know, if the strategic plan didn't work, then yeah, it was my issue. But if the strategic plan did work, then everybody got some benefit from it. And there were parts that worked and parts that we had to re-engineer constantly. But it all came down to transparency, honesty, truth, and then listening and taking that feedback and making adjustments and having more people engage in the process than fewer people. Because I could have run the thing all by myself, no problem.
And I think that's typical, right? There's a handful of people that are executing a plan that basically have no idea what's really going on at the front.
And that's always the biggest challenge in strategic plans, that the people who actually do the work have no idea how they connect together. And that's why we talked about cascade. So you start at the top of the organization, they develop themes, strategic imperatives, and then as you work through the organization, you cascade it so that each part of the organization says, how do I fit into this? Where do I contribute to succeed here, all the way down to the desk level? And that was a part of the process that I inherited when I started. We had posters that people could jot down. The challenge is strategic plans are organic. They're alive. They're a live organism. So you do a poster, and within 3 days, it's out of print.
Yeah.
And so we had to figure out a way. And so I would do, like these. I would do a presentation, 20 minutes on what's going right, what's going wrong, what have we achieved, just so the people who were interested could look at that. And then I would review one of the sets of metrics. We had a metrics document that we circulated throughout the organization after each cabinet meeting. And so I would get questions on the definitions, which is great. That means people are really asking questions, and they're challenging and making sure that they understand why the number is the number. They're being data informed, not data driven. Oh my gosh, the number's going down. That's awful. Yeah. Well, we expected it to go down, right? Because people graduate, and we graduate a couple times a year. So that's going to happen.
Well, yeah, I'm going to jump in here and just critique or correct one of the things you said. You said that strategic plans are living organisms. I think the accuracy of that is effective strategic plans.
There you go.
Are living organisms, because the reality is strategic plans mostly are history books.
Right.
This is what we remember in this year, what we hoped we would do in 5. That's what that book represents. Yeah. But when they are living, they become that. And I know we're gonna definitely come back to this concept you just dropped on the table about being data informed. But before we go there, I'm curious. My experience with you as a leader, you come as the chief strategy officer. I am a key leader in the strategic plan at your entry. The thing that I was so more than drawn to, it was like a fresh drink of water, was your business perspective. When you started asking, you regularly asked me, you didn't ask me why a lot. You asked me.
You knew why.
I knew why. I was very passionate about why, because it was connected to my story. Right. That was the why. But you regularly asked me, I would say a thing, because we're going to do this because we need to. And you didn't disagree with that. In fact, you often said, well, you've been in education longer than I have, so I'm going to trust that's probably right. But how will you know? And when you first asked me that question, I'm like, how will I know what? Yeah. How will you know that you're doing it? Well, when it's done, that's how I'll know. And that sounds ridiculous, but in higher education, return on investment, the leading and lagging metrics, we don't lean into them much. And I think a lot of times it's because our initiatives are birthed out of our instinct. What I feel like this feels right. And that's where I was as a strategic leader. Now, some of the things I felt were right, and some of the things I felt were just off, but we wouldn't have known that without that question. And so without going into the data portion of it, my curiosity is, you showed up with this, as you described, that I want to go and I need to hear what these individual division leaders, department leaders, in my case, it was leading both the plan and a new initiative. And you sitting down was such a breath of fresh air, because the first time I felt like someone actually cared about what I was trying to do. My level of belonging went up. The plan itself, as you just so eloquently described, it connects these high level things to what me and many others are doing, even at lower levels. And my shared purpose started to increase, because now I have a vested interest in that. So, like, you were doing this. I was in the middle. You weren't aware of this at the time, really, but I was in the middle of my research, really, around the human experience and what does this look like? What is really effective leadership? Because it's predicated on something that's consistent, and that became the human experience. Somewhere along the line in your career, your long career, because you're old.
I am.
You're old.
I was born, as somebody would say, in the middle 1900s.
When
I guess the kids are calling it the middle 1900s.
Higher education, I think, was one room still when you went through the first time.
You could go from kindergarten through your master's degree in
all in one
building.
No, I kid, but you've had a career and you've led at a very high level. I know when you were a senior VP. At one point, you told me you were leading more than 500 people.
Yeah.
Like that is significant level, and I want to draw attention to that, because sometimes those listening go, "Okay, well, you lead a team of 3." No, you've led people, and along that journey, there's been learnings. I'm just curious. Can you recall an instance or two that you're going, that was a pivotal moment for me? Maybe it was a mistake that you got. I can't do that. That doesn't work. Because when you showed up, you were the leader I needed, and partly one that I still highly regard and try to model in a lot of ways. But do you have those moments? Like, what are those moments?
Yeah, I don't know that there were any giant events. I think the process that I've had in building my leadership approach has been a series of iterative small steps. And I think maybe the theme from the very beginning is I always wanted to be a leader in an organization. When I was a kid, I was an acolyte at our church in New Jersey, and the lead pastor there used to refer to me, and I was 12, the chairman of the board, because of the way I approach things. So my dad and my mom really influenced the work ethic and the focus on being kind to people.
Yeah.
And so that was really the foundation on which I wanted to build my leadership technique. And as I said earlier, I've worked for some really outstanding leaders, and I've worked for some really horrifyingly bad leaders. And I've always found that collaboration, engagement, listening are all the elements on which I built, and then use specific decisions or events to prove to yourself that is what you bring to the table. And I'll talk about one little tiny experience in my last job. I was traveling with an individual who's a VP over a very large market segment, and then her account manager was coming with us, and I was going too. And in the course of the discussion in starting the trip out, she mentioned that her daughter was going to be receiving significant scholarships in an award program at the high school the night that we were leaving.
Oh, wow.
And I said, you are going to go home and you're going to go do that. Your account manager and I can take care of this trip. It's not a big deal, because that's an event you can't miss.
Yeah.
Because it'll never happen again. We'll have more of these meetings. And when we share the reason that you're not here, nobody will have an issue with it. And nobody had an issue with it. The meeting went great. And she was able to see and participate in a milestone. If leaders don't make decisions like that,
right,
in the moment, then they've not connected with their organizations. Now, that isn't to say that I have such great touchy-feely approach, but you got to, if you want to lead people, you have to care about people, right? You talk about humanity. humanity is a really big word to me. I use empathy. I need to be in the feel with the people I work with. I need to understand how they feel. I need to share and participate in that. And that's kind of the core.
Yeah.
The other element of it is in all the time. So I've been in the workforce, 43 years, probably 3 years when I didn't have people reporting to me. And I came across a book. I went to a conference. I was running a customer service organization at Shell, and heard a man talk, Dr. Hyler Bracey, and he wrote a book called Managing from the Heart. That book probably summarizes, and I think I've mentioned this to you. I probably have given you a copy.
You gave
it's
me the book.
the only book that I ever bought enough copies to give out.
I
to
think
people.
it was a subliminal message at the beginning. Just
Well,
kidding. You did give me a copy
because
of
I
this
didn't whack you in the head with it.
with
It was,
a post-it note that is still on the cover of the book that said "Read at your leisure."
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're still at your leisure, right?
I haven't read it yet.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. Yes, I have.
But anyway, the premise, HEART, had the phrases, and those are the things I've hung on to as my core values. Hear and understand me. Even if you disagree, don't make me wrong.
Right.
Acknowledge the greatness within me. That's humanity, right?
Yep.
Remember to look for my loving intention. So if I screw up,
Positive intent.
yeah, positive intent, and then tell me the truth with compassion.
Yep.
If you can do those things even reasonably well, the rest of it flows within the context of that orientation. And when I feel like I've drifted from that, and I have,
Of course.
I go back and I just look at the cover of the book. I don't even have to read the book anymore.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the intent and core of how I approach things. Is I want to have fun because we spend too much time at work to not enjoy what we do, and I want to enjoy the people that I work with, and I want to enjoy the battle and the hunt and the success and the failure. Right?
It's interesting. Like, it seems like you, just in your leadership style and the way that you lead is so natural to just who you are, and being able to, lead with that heart and have the fun, but also, you mentioned, just being able to bring people into the conversation who normally wouldn't have been invited to the table to talk about the strategy, and which creates silos and distrust, or just feeling lack of belonging, lack of shared purpose. And I'm curious, as you were going through that with that organization, like what Adam shared his specific example with him and how your leadership changed him. What did you see, in terms of across the organization once you started to bring that higher level of communication, and that visibility and transparency, and I assume other individuals started to feel a greater sense of belonging and that shared purpose as well. What changes did you start to see across the organization related to that?
It was a better understanding of the plan, and more of an acknowledgement that the plan was working, that results were happening because of the execution. And again, I really didn't do anything. I wasn't an executor of tasks. I was a follower-upper, project manager, encourager, cheerleader. But I think probably the best result was that we started to think about what's next, and we started to think about what's missing.
Yeah.
So there's some great questions that our consultant who originally launched the plan used. What's working, what's not working, what's important, what's missing, what's next. And as you get into a rigor of doing that regularly, we did a quarterly review as a group, and you find stuff that's not working, or find things in the plan that are no longer important, no longer viable, or they're stale. They need to be revised. And if you get emotionally attached to it is what it is, the plan is what it is, then you're not going to make those changes. So we became a collaborative organization of thinking through, and that concept, whether we use, we don't use the Patterson model anymore, that continues on in the organization. We've increased the level of curiosity. We've increased the level of measurement and understanding based on that foundation. And our new leadership is encouraging people to experiment and try and test. And this all kind of ties into the culture elements that you all have talked about as well. You have to have a culture of curiosity, of experimentation, of risk of failure. When I used to talk on culture, I would say you walk into an organization, on the wall it says, we strive, we recognize experimentation and we don't fear failure. And then the first team that fails gets executed in front of everybody. It's like, right. Yeah, okay, never mind. We won't do that. So it's you believe what the walls have after you believe what you're hearing in the hall, right?
Yeah.
So you acknowledge that reality.
Yeah.
But
I think you said, sorry, Erika, you said we became a collaborative organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so many leaders set out in this journey, and we've talked about executing. How do you improve the human experience? And leaning into this part of it is what we're really talking about is you're improving the level or increasing the level of vulnerability in the organization. And the indicator of that is more people participating by saying, this isn't right, this is missing, this didn't work. And that began to happen. But you will remember as clearly as I do, that did not happen for the first 6 months.
No.
I mean, it
the
was
first
a
2
lot
months,
of.
I just tried to get numbers in the plan.
Yeah, well,
there were 2 numbers in the entire strategic
even when
plan.
we started getting people in the same room and you asked the question, what's missing? It was crickets because there wasn't vulnerability yet. But what you said is so important for our organizational leaders listening, especially those in education. Keep asking the question. Eventually, they'll realize the sincerity of your request. I love what you said. They won't believe what's on the walls till they hear it in the halls, right? If our leaders are embodying curiosity as you did and as you demonstrated for so many others, not only personal curiosity but professional curiosity, then it starts to like permeate our environment. It's in the office culture, and now it's in the hall. And now when I show up to one of those meetings, I'm going, yeah, they genuinely believe I have a perspective that matters, and I'm willing to share that. So I just want to emphasize, you said,
and then in your situation, you were leading an action initiative plan, and you were the lowest graded person on a plan. So you were coming to represent a really significant part of what the university is trying to achieve in an area where everyone outranked you and I. So
that's the truth.
Again, you have to bring so you have to almost sometimes check your honesty at the door a little bit. Not that you're going to be dishonest, but some things you have to not bring to the table
yet
in a big group like that, because it's like pouring gasoline on everybody and then setting everybody on fire, right?
I was good at that. We won't talk about that.
In fact, you were.
I learned that.
But that's one of the things that creates this kind of mental, it destabilizes enough that you start to question, okay, was this really the right thing?
Sure.
Is this really the right approach?
Right.
And some of the things we laid on the table, until we developed the measurements associated with it, we had people who was trying to disprove, not accept and understand. It was like, no, that's not, I don't see that. That's not the way it's going. That's not right. The data doesn't say that. Here's data that says others.
Yeah, I think one prime example of what you just said, Kevin, is when we started doing work about trying to figure out who's leaving the organization, because that was the essence of my wing of the strategic plan. How do we stop this? We brought people in, we invited people in, and we started having the conversation. And what we heard over and over and over again is that those who are leaving have a low GPA. And when we were finally able to get access to the information to process the data side of this, what we found out is what we felt was way, way off. Because what we discovered was the average GPA of those who were leaving the institution in droves was 3.4, which is a really good GPA. And it totally wrecked the strategy, because we were spending a lot of time trying to clean up messes that weren't really messes. And then that data allowed us to take a different perspective. And I think that is just a prime example of what you were just suggesting.
Yeah, I wanted to circle back because earlier you had mentioned, taking a more data-informed approach versus data-driven, and how that language is really important. Can you just kind of describe the difference between those two and how that impacts the culture?
It's a great question. And I think the key on being data-driven is that you watch the numbers, you establish the numbers, you watch the numbers, and then you react and take action based on the numbers to some extent. I've never worked at a place that was 100% committed to doing everything by the numbers. The clarification that I make in being data-driven is before you take action on the numbers, understand why the numbers are the numbers, right? Are they accurately measured?
Right.
I've been talking about an example before we started here about we were tracking, a certain leading indicator, and the number kept getting bigger and bigger, and it's like, there's no way. And then we realized it wasn't measuring the right thing. So I could make all kinds of decisions based on that number increasing or assume results. But to understand why the numbers are doing what they're doing, because that's the diagnostic process. So data, to me, needs to be a diagnostic mechanism. It's not the be-all, end-all.
Right.
Even an airline pilot who's flying and their indicators on their dashboard or their control panel say something, they'll pull out a checklist and they'll go through a list of things on what's wrong, what do I change? And that's what we need to do. And that's why what I call data informed is run the checklist to determine, are we measuring the right thing? Did something change? Is it, what do we think the drivers are? How do we prove that those are the drivers? It's like doing problem-based learning. Here's a problem. Now let's figure out why it's doing what it's doing before we take action on it.
Right.
And some, are clear and you understand them very clearly, but so many are not clear enough to everybody who's involved to really help in the diagnostic process. So,
well, I think it's
and Adam used to tell me all the time, you got to go slow to go fast.
Yeah.
In data, you got to take the time to understand it before you take action because you could fly the plane into a mountain.
Being curious even about the data that you're seeing to understand.
To me, that's the fun part is to, the numbers look great. Now let's figure out why.
Why
do they look great?
Well, I think data should first provoke questions.
Yeah.
And when it doesn't, that becomes a problem. Because like you said, the numbers that you described in the example that we're not sharing in detail here were good. It should have been like, celebrate, let's schedule a pizza party, right? I mean, instead, it provoked a question. Why are they so good? Let's better understand that. And you found out they were false. The reality of that is, whether it's good or bad, is that our data in a human-centered approach should provoke questions, not just solidify decisions.
And this is a really key point, I think, and this is where our chancellor has really re-energized the organization, because curiosity and questions are two key mantras that our leadership are now bringing forward to us, which is great, because that empowers us to ask tougher questions of each other.
Right.
And to be curious about what does that mean? Why is that? Kind of like when I started and people didn't understand what I was saying, they'd go, okay, explain this to me.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What does that mean in our context? Is it really appropriate in academics? So I could get probably shouldn't use that terminology anymore because it doesn't really fit. Or let me adapt it to something that's more familiar with somebody.
Yeah. Well, I know Erika and I made a commitment when we started this process to try to be as pragmatic as possible. And we've talked a lot about strategic plans, the execution of those plans, data informed, and how do you do that in a human-centered approach. I think there's a lot of rich information in our conversation today. But I know that there's one really pragmatic thing here that you can share, that you've brought with you. And I think we'd like to let that be our pragmatic solution today, because as a part of building plans, you do have to come up with objectives, key results, KPIs, and all that. How do you do that well? Yeah,
so I think the fear is that everything you put in a plan are platitudes, and nobody really understands what they are. We talked about earlier about where people plug in, and I was doing a consulting engagement with a university, and we were talking through strategic objectives and does it resonate with people to take action. And the way they originally wrote the strategic objective was, we want to expand the brick and click reach to become a nationally known university. Brick and click, I think, is cool because I work for a university that has physical and online. But what does that mean? I live in Indiana. They were in a different state. Does that mean because I know of them that they're nationally known? So what I suggested was expand brick and click reach to become a nationally known university, achieving Newsweek America's Best Online Learning School in the top 200 rated schools, and the Forbes America's Top Colleges Top 500 list, and they weren't on each list by 2027 or whatever year you want to select. that gives somebody, and that's probably overly verbose because I was trying to make a point.
Yeah.
But unless you know how you're going to measure it, what you're going to measure and how you're going to measure it, and how do you know you get there, then you don't ever complete it. Or that you check it off that, yeah, I feel like this has been done. And feeling in any kind of business that has constituents and stakeholders, you got to be able to explain how do you fit into delivering that? And what do I expect of you? And when people know what's expected of them, then they have a much better experience. I used to say to my leadership, if people don't know whether you are excited to see them today, and if they don't know whether we're winning or losing, we've lost the battle before we even turn on a machine.
Yeah.
They got to know.
First question that a leader should ask when they see, whether it's an employee or a team that seems to be inactive, the first question they should ask is, do they have clarity?
Exactly.
Because inaction is always preceded by a lack of clarity. And I think that's why a lot of times our strategic plans don't get the traction that they need. But as you were reading that and the way you transform their, brick and click language into something that you could follow and build initiatives out of, it reminded me of what I really came to understand as a strategic leader, is that those high level initiatives, when they're written pretty well, it's kind of like one run-on sentence.
Yeah.
Like we shouldn't
It's unfortunate.
We shouldn't be including English and grammar in the development of those because it
Grammarly
needs
had
to
a
be
stroke
rich.
when it looked at that phrase.
It couldn't rewrite it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's super important, is we are going to do what by doing this, and we'll know it's happening by these things.
Exactly.
So specific, and it gives you something to celebrate. Like, that is something you can get excited about.
You can get excited about being number 199, right? While you're on your way to whatever your number is. We weren't on the list, and now we're on the list.
Yeah, yay.
That's a great
It's like
point,
we've
because
been watching or reading Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara.
Good book.
And they went from not on the list to, and they were so ashamed that they made the number 100 of the top 100 restaurants.
Yeah.
But they got on the list,
Right.
right? And then they worked their way up.
Well, that's what happens. We're going to be, I don't remember how you said it. We're going to be the number one brick and click. Okay, well, until
Nationally
you're number
known.
one.
We're going to be nationally known.
But what does that mean?
Yeah.
And until you are number one,
How will you know
my
it?
example, you're just disappointed. Even though you went from 550 to 199, you're still, it really does bring in that moment. And then you move the bar, right? You just keep moving the bar. And we did that over
Because
and
the
over again.
tactics and action plans that go with going from nothing to 500, 500 to 300,
Yes.
300, those are different.
What got you here won't get you there.
I think we should write a book on that.
We should write a book, Kevin. I agree with you. What were you going to say, Eric?
No, I just no, that's a great point to end on. Where can I go from there? But I was just thinking, with a vague objective, if you ask 10 different people what that might look like, you would get 10 different answers. And so just contributing to that sense of shared purpose is that everybody understands what that looks like when that objective is met. So that's great for thought.
To drive that point home even further, Sarah Spangler was here with us in the middle of season 1. She's doing incredible things with an organization called Elevated Education. They had launched an initiative this last summer, and I'm still consulting with them, and so I'm a part of this. And that initiative, much like this, was we're going to be the best alternative high school in the state of Arizona. And so what we did as a part of our engagement is, okay, well, let's invite people in. And we solicited information as a part of our engagement from every member of the organization to actually create a unified definition of what does that even mean? Like, what does it mean to be the best? And that's the point you're making. You could ask everyone in the organization, which we did, and get, 100 different responses,
Right.
which we did. And then you've got to unify that. Okay, what does it look like?
And you took the average, which is what we do, right?
For sure. But what's great about that, and to last final thing here on this, because why, as an organizational leader, why do this? And you do this because then when you've invited people into the room, you've solicited their input to how do we define, how will we know, what does it look like? And then when you write that initiative, they see their voice in it. And when I see my voice in something, I say that matters. And that's a reason to do this, if nothing else, is to represent the voice, the perspective, and the expertise of everyone in your organization from top to bottom. That's how you get movement. Change theory will tell you if you get 70% of the organization on board, a change initiative will be successful. The way you do that is you integrate their voice into the process. So with that, Kevin, thank you so much for not just being here, but being who you are, the influence you've had in my life.
I'm the best me that I know.
Thank God there's only one.
Yes, thank God.
No, for real. I've told you before, you mean so much to me, and I reference your influence in my life on a regular basis, and I couldn't be more grateful. Thank you for joining us and expressing that wisdom to our audience and ourselves. And
absolutely.
What a good start, Erika, to season two, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, I'm
Off
looking
at the
forward
bang.
to it.
Awesome.
Good job.
Cheers.
Cheers. No.
No fist bumping. Thanks for joining us here at the Leading Adam podcast. We hope you found inspiration and hope to see you again next time. Leave us a comment on YouTube, or if you have an idea for a future episode, let us know that too. You can connect with us at 240solutions.com. Thanks, and we hope to see you again next time.